Today, Texas urban land use is one of the most overregulated institutions as a result of zoning. The zoning laws, in theory, prevent incompatible land uses, but in practice, they really just ban apartments in central urban neighborhoods where apartments are most needed. This ban is extremely unhealthy for cities. Growth restrictions prevent natural vertical population growth and forces growth to instead be horizontal in the form of sprawl. Growth restrictions also exclude people from easily accessing the cultural and economic benefits of the urban core, and growth restrictions also make civic activity and discourse difficult to participate in. But the effect I wish to focus on is the economic consequences. I'm hoping to prove to you that restricting apartment production, and thus restricting housing supply, results in expensive urban housing. To prove this, I'm going to investigate two contrasting cities, Austin and Houston. Austin is known as the most regulated city in Texas, and Houston famously has no zoning. Thus, they represent a natural experiment in how land use regulation affects housing price. First, I want to establish just how restrictive zoning regulation is by examining Austin's land use laws. The most extensive form of regulation is single-family zoning, which limits density to, well, single-family homes. Shown in yellow, this zoning covers most of central Austin, severely limiting how much housing can be built in the city. Of course, multifamily housing can still be built, but it is limited to the commercial corridors, and it still has to contend with other building regulations. Building height limits, building setback requirements, minimum parking quotas, which are always larger than what an urban location would naturally require, and worst of all, compatibility, which draws an arbitrary height limit on buildings neighboring a single-family home. Hypothetically, it's possible to upzone all the single-family zone land to multifamily land, but in practice, this hasn't happened, even in a city where demand for urban living is red hot. Why is that? First off, compatibility with your neighbor will slash the height of any proposed building and consequently reduce the amount of homes a multifamily structure can house. So why go through the effort of rezoning in the first place? Second, the culture of these central urban neighborhoods is very much NIMBY, not in my backyard. These neighborhoods consistently vote fellow NIMBYs onto city council, which is a powerful step that empowers NIMBYs to control growth in their neighborhoods. That's because zoning changes are approved by a majority vote at city council, and if enough NIMBYs are on council, they have the power to consistently delay and deny upzonings. And the NIMBYs are a serious faction in local politics. During my time in Austin, they usually occupied about half of the city council seats and made any sort of upzoning a difficult ordeal. In addition to the NIMBY's considerable influence at city council, they have a powerful weapon that guarantees their domination over neighborhood growth. Known as the valid petition, this Texas law states that if someone applies for an upzoning on their land, but just 20% of their nearby neighbors sign a valid petition and submit that petition to city council, the applicant would now require a 3/4 majority at city council to receive their upzoning. In practice, this means a small minority of neighbors are given power to essentially control development. So there's your reason. That's why white-hot neighborhoods in central Austin have no new townhomes or apartments. The rules of development are written to prevent growth. Finally, Austin's land use code is extremely convoluted and confusing. City staff paid to review proposed development plans and enforce the land use code are supposed to understand the code. In practice, however, knowing the details such as exactly what depth a sewer pipe needs to be buried in the ground for a residential structure in the Hyde Park neighborhood boundaries and where to find that depth in the 1,000-page code gets complicated. It's not uncommon for city staff to internally disagree about the code, and this inevitably ends up stifling the development process. Furthermore, Austin is notorious for all its development fees like platting fees, inspection fees, and building permits, and they all add up. By one account, about $20,000 per home. Needless to say, everyone in the Austin real estate community kind of agrees that the code is just a big mess. If Austin represents the extreme end of Texas land use regulation, on the other end is Houston. In Houston, there are still some building requirements, but overall, The lack of zoning means that the city is extremely dynamic because the people are given the freedom to build what they want. Apartments next to a single-family home? No problem. Container box homes? Of course. Garage businesses? Yep. No single-use zoning designation can bar this homeowner from running her neighborhood CBD cafe. Houston's free market allows growth to be handled by society at large and is the cornerstone to the city's healthy housing supply. What are the economic effects of these two approaches to development? Well, in Austin, housing is difficult to build, and new housing usually takes the form of really expensive single-family mansions. In Houston, the pace of development is fast. 42,354 homes were built inside the loop between 2014 and 2019. If you take a stroll through inner loop neighborhoods, you will find that the vast majority of these homes take the form of townhomes or apartments. And if you're looking at the price tags, you'll also find more affordable options in Houston. To prove the point, a brief search on HAR reveals that there are 197 two-bedroom, two-bathroom homes listed for less than $400K in urban Houston, whereas urban Austin only has 14. It's quite a stark difference, and I wanted to ask the question, is this new home price differential the result of different land use law? I decided to buckle down and conduct a study comparing Austin's growth-restricted neighborhoods and Houston's free market neighborhoods. In doing so, I gathered data from 1,048 home sale transactions, 389 land sale transactions, from 25 central urban neighborhoods in Austin and Houston between the years of 2015 and 2020. I also spoke with home builders to get an understanding of what typical construction and permitting costs per square foot looked like. I then analyzed the data I had gathered to search for citywide patterns that indicated that Houston's laissez-faire approach to development was the reason for its cheaper housing. This video is meant to summarize my major findings, but if you want to know the details of my methodology, I'll link a more in-depth paper below. The first major finding is that when I calculated median land value in each of the neighborhoods, Houston and Austin urban neighborhoods had similar value distributions. This is significant because those dollar numbers tell us how much people are willing to pay to live in these areas, and by extension, how many people are willing to pay. If the land value is high in both the Houston and Austin neighborhood, for whatever reason, be they proximity to parks, jobs, famous bars, whatever, then we can also assume that housing is equally desired in both these neighborhoods. Thus, we can compare the studied neighborhoods apples to apples and draw clear conclusions from them. Which sets me up for my second major finding. Despite similar desirability, housing is more expensive in Austin by every metric. This systemic pattern was most clearly seen when I took each of the 25 neighborhoods' median home values and plotted them versus the neighborhood's underlying land value, which remember is a proxy for desirability. The plot I produced shows every Austin neighborhood as more expensive than its Houston equivalent. Which all begs the question, where did Austin's inflated home prices come from? Well, part of it has to do with higher construction and development costs in Austin. According to my interviews, Houston builders say that homes cost $110 to $135 to permit and build per square foot. Comparatively, typical Austin homes cost $150 to $200, and the hyper-luxury homes of South Austin cost $225 to $250. I believe it's safe to assume physical construction costs are equivalent in Austin and Houston, and that the reason for Austin's larger construction costs are due to the aforementioned confusing code and exorbitant building fees. The other reason for Austin's inflated housing costs are its neighborhood growth restrictions. Single-family zoning in Austin limits minimum lot sizes to an excessive 5,750 square feet, whereas in Houston the minimum lot size is 1,400 square feet. Meanwhile, compatibility and NIMBYs limit the number of homes Austin builders can build on a lot to about 2 homes. This forces Austin builders into building homes bundled with way too much land, whereas Houston builders are free to build land-efficient townhomes. Looking at my data, the average lot size in Austin neighborhoods was about 4,500 square feet, whereas in Houston the average lot size was 2,000 square feet. When I estimated the average cost of a lot of land in each neighborhood by using the estimated neighborhood land values and multiplying them by each home's lot size, then averaging neighborhood-wide, the Austin neighborhoods had land costs that were about $100,000 more expensive. This increase is not because Austin land is more valuable, it's because homes are legally required to include excessive amounts of land. I think the greatest takeaway from this video is that the typical American city's urban form is not the result of natural economics, but more the result of overpowering local control. Not just in Austin, but coast to coast, homeowners have the power to restrict growth and freeze central urban neighborhoods to stay as small as they were when they were first built. Obviously, this is a huge disruption from the way that cities have historically grown and is cause of several issues ranging from congested roadways, urban sprawl, social disconnection, inequitable access to opportunity, the obesity epidemic, and much more. While the methodology of this study may not have been the most scientifically rigorous, it is still indicative of a universal economic mechanism. That density is the way in which high land values are divided. Whether housing prices are affordable is one topic, but it's irrelevant to the point. Denser housing forms like townhomes lower land costs and consequently housing costs for their inhabitants. Since we built the first cities, we've built them to be dense for more or less this exact reason. And the results of this study are further proof that it still works today. Enacting density limits disrupts this mechanism and results in overpriced homes that are bundled with way too much land. I may have made Austin seem a bit like a villain in this video, but I want to reassure my viewers that there are many people in Austin getting into the nitty-gritty of local government trying to overturn the city's outdated growth restrictions. I wish them all the best of luck, and I hope this video contributes to public support for their efforts. If you wish to learn more about the study, I recommend you follow the link below to the paper. I go into much more depth about the numbers, laws, and assumptions that I made that I didn't have time to go through in this video. Finally, if you liked the video, please do share and subscribe. See you next time.